Recording live from Glory Hole Studios in Chicago and beyond. This is Cognitive Dissonance. Every episode we blast anyone who gets in our way. We bring critical thinking, skepticism, and irreverence to any topic that makes the news, makes it big, or makes us mad. It's skeptical, it's political, and there is no welcome mat. Today is, well, you're listening to this on Thursday, March I'm going to go 13th. Yeah.
That sounds about good.
Sounds right to me.
Sounds about right.
It's the 6th. I think a week from now would probably be 7 days. That's the 13th.
Yeah.
So, today we're recording it as it is March 6th, was our long form deep dive episode. We're going to be talking about an article from Rolling Stone called The Psychedelic Miracle not here in quotes. Strong disagree. They need to have quotes here.
Also, this is from 2017. So this is an older article. This is an older article. You may hear some names in here that were just sort of on the fringes at the time. Brett Weinstein is one of the names that you'll hear in here. So he's one of the people who's pro psychedelic use. And he's also one of these intellectual dark web guys. He's on Rogan. He's, one of these free speech dudes.
Right.
So understand that there's some stuff that gets said in here already that I'm already leary of.
Is he one of those crazy COVID guys?
Yeah, he's an anti-COVID.
Yeah, he's an anti-COVID vax guy.
Yeah. Thought that the media was pushing the vaccine and pushing the narrative on the vaccine. One of those people.
One of those nut jobs.
Yeah. So this article is really interesting because it's kind of split. The way it's written, it's split between personal experience and informative article.
Right.
Which I thought was an interesting way to tell this story, because it's a story about somebody who decides to do some of these psychedelics to try to help their own problems with their own mental health, and at the same time do the research about what's happening in the world, talk to the major large figures that are doing the research. And, when I say research here, there's a lot of quotes around that.
Heavy air
quotes around research, but gets an opportunity to talk to those people, but then also explores lots of other different ins and outs about the use of psychedelics for medical use to try to treat people for problems with their mental illness, with problems with mental health.
Cecil sends me just a little peek behind the curtain. Every week, Cecil sends me a handful of long form ideas. And it's like, hey, pick one. And so I look at them and I saw this, and I always read them all, but I jumped on this one pretty readily. And I jumped on this one because this does dovetail with a personal interest of mine, which is, the way that our medical care system intersects with, and I think very often fails people that have challenges with their mental health.
Yeah.
It's something I'm interested in. It's something that I've done a little bit of reading about independently. It's something that I've experienced within my family. And so it's something that I just have a native interest in. I think this article does a really good job of kind of showing you both sides of the picture to some degree, at least, right? So even though it says the psychedelic miracle, I think this article, to give it a little bit of credit, does point out hey, this is a little problematic. There's a lot of people walking around right now. And you see this, I'll tell you what, this was written in 2017. It's been fucking 8 years. And this has only accelerated.
Yeah, there's
across those 8 years.
Yeah.
There are, you could buy magic mushrooms online. There is a heavy communities, Reddit boards, everything else that you can imagine that, talk about ayahuasca, that talk about DMT, that talk about MDMA, that talk about, a lot of these mushrooms very often, to a lesser degree as far as psychedelics are concerned, because I know it's not one, but Special K, ketamine, some of which are approved for medical use. Ketamine is one of those approved, so you can get a literal prescription for it. But a lot of things that are being sold and touted otherwise for mental health treatment. I think it's worth really spending some time and talking about, but I want to identify one key problem that I think is important to recognize. And that is that we don't have a medical care system in this country, or I think out of this country, that does an adequate job of addressing mental health concerns for the general population. And when I say that, I want to say like nobody gets better. It's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that we are in the historical infancy of treating mental health diseases. We're in the pharmaceutical infancy of developing good, effective, safe drugs for mental health. A lot of the stuff that we've developed and discovered has turned out to be problematic. There's a lot of like we're just the beginning stages of all this. And that means that a lot of people are hurting and suffering, and we don't have good options for people. And I'm always very, very sympathetic at the individual user level of the need to have those medical issues addressed, and the fear and the need and the lack of a good place to turn when the medical care system doesn't provide good answers. I think that's like a huge part of what's being sometimes exploited here and sometimes explored here in terms of psychedelics.
Yeah. I think there's some real serious issues with psychedelics that when I listen to this, what popped into my head the first time when I listened to this was the issues I have with it are that I don't know that we ever will be able to prescribe these things in the same way we prescribe other things, because what occurred to me was it doesn't feel like they do the same thing for every person. Whereas like if I were to prescribe to you codeine, there's a good chance, very good chance in fact, that it would do the things I would want it to do. Now there are occasions that it wouldn't do. You might be allergic. It might not affect you. It might have a problem with it, whatever, or, however that works. But on the average, if I prescribe codeine and you didn't, and there wasn't any of those problems, it would do what I need it to do for you. Same thing with other drugs. We would just be like, okay, this drug does this thing. The problem is that all these drugs do wildly different things for different people.
Yeah.
And they do them not just for like a small amount of time. They do them for days at a time. This isn't just like a 2-hour or a 3-hour buzz or something like that. We're talking about something that can put you in a weird psychotic state for 72 hours. I mean, you could be 3 full days on one. The way they're describing it in this, a couple of these people are saying they're on these, they're dealing with all of these emotions and all of these traumas, and also having these recurring sort of visions, et cetera, for many days at a time. Yeah. That's an insane amount of time, but it also just like, if one person has it for 3 days and one person only has it for a short amount of time, how hard is that for the doctor to sort of just be able to decide whether or not that thing is good to give to somebody? I think like what people are expecting is that these things just go and get tested, and then we eventually are going to be able to just say, yeah, that's fine. But I think there's some drugs that are just so unpredictable that you just can't, they'll never be something that your doctor writes you a script for.
Yeah, I think there's an enormous problem. I think what you've hit on is something that is the problem of standardization, right? Like standardizing our dosages in order to create a statistically standardized effect. And I think, broadly speaking, that's hard enough to do with mental health stuff in general, right? So like it's a common thing with mental health for it to be like, well, we're going to try this and we're going to see how it works.
Sure, yeah.
And some people respond and some people don't.
Yeah.
And you might need to change your dose and you might need to add this thing to that thing in order for it to have an effect. It's already a deeply kind of like unscientific, let's give this a whirl and see what happens kind of an approach with mental health to start with. Then with psychedelics, they seem even less predictable than that, right? They seem even more unpredictable. And like, to your point, like some of the dosages and lengths of time that these drugs are, I don't want to call them medicines because they're not medicines yet, that these drugs are being used for, these are like heroic doses, right? Like these are like crazy. They're talking about like, in this article, they're talking about giving somebody MDMA in such quantities that they're essentially immobilized. So like, if you take MDMA as ecstasy, if you take ecstasy, that is very often a party drug. You would take an amount and then go dance, You would not take so much that you would be immobilized by it, but they are giving these, and this is all experimental. It's human guinea pig. It's anecdata.
That's a big one. Yeah.
You know, it's people, you know, one of the people they're talking about in the front of this article is a guy who is a doctor, but he's not a psychiatrist. He's a fucking GP. And he's off the fucking ranch. He's buying these drugs illegally, right? Because you cannot buy them legally. Then they're doing like home test kits to see if they even contain what they're supposed to contain. And I'll tell a quick story about that. Haley and I did ecstasy a few years back. I'd never done it before. She had done it like as a teenager. She had a really positive experience with it. I had read a whole bunch of stuff and I was like, hey, sounds like a lot of fun. Why don't we like take some ecstasy, turn on some music, and like, you know, the kids are gone for the weekend. We'll just like turn on some music and like have a good time. I've always wanted to kind of try it. So she's like, yeah, sure. So I had somebody that I knew that I thought, you know, they had a reputable connection and, you know, but I'm not an idiot. So I bought the ecstasy. Oh, and I'll tell you a funny story about that in a second too. I bought the ecstasy and then I bought these test kits. And see, so the test kits you get at home can identify and make sure that you have either, like it filters out and it turns colors. You do this whole thing. And then it's like, okay, you have either ecstasy or meth.
Oh, wow.
You don't have fentanyl. It says like, it'll tell you like, you don't have fentanyl, you don't have opioids, you don't have all these other things. But the closest it could winnow down for me on a test kit that I could use at home, you can actually mail your samples out to a company and they'll test it. But I didn't do that. But like the closest it could be is like, okay, you either have ecstasy or meth. And the only reason I was willing to trust it is because the people I bought it from had a really good time and they described an experience which was descriptive of
Sounded like ecstasy,
right?
Yeah.
And not descriptive of meth. And I knew it wasn't all this other stuff. So I felt comfortable and I felt safe. I'll also tell you a quick Tom doesn't know anything about drugs story. I don't know anything about drugs. I didn't take any drugs as a teenager. I didn't take drugs as a 20-something. I don't know anything about drugs. So when I went to my friend who was connected and I was like, hey, I want to buy some ecstasy, but I don't know anything about it. So like, I don't even know how much it costs. And she's like, well, how much do you want? And I was like, I don't even understand how to answer that question. I don't know like what a dose is. So I was like, I felt kind of dumb. And I'm like, I don't know, like, here's a couple $100. Like if you could get me some ecstasy. And she was like, sure, yeah, whatever. And then she gives me this ecstasy. She gives me an enormous amount of ecstasy. I had
you bought
no
enough
idea.
to go to jail.
Like she was so sweet about it. Like she like gets the ice. She's like, oh, I parceled it all out into like these gel caps. So you have enough for like, for you and Haley for like, you know, 6 or 7 trips or whatever together. I'm like, I just wanted one. I just didn't know how much it cost. So I was just like, I'm like fucking Dennis and Dee from It's Always Sunny being like, I'd like 500 cracks, please.
you get that. And then she gave you your change in ecstasy.
Yeah, right. It was just really Tom doesn't know anything about drugs moment. I'm like, I don't know how much this shit costs.
Sure.
I threw money at the problem and ended up with like way more drugs than I was comfortable with and ended up giving them away. But like, it was funny. But like that sort of stuff, you don't know what, like even these doctors experimenting, they don't know what they're getting. Because they can't, they don't have a hookup. They don't have the best you can do test kit wise at home is you can mail it out or you can do these test kits. But like, it's all fucking experiments on the street, man. That's not how science be.
Yeah.
None of that is sciencing.
Yeah. And they also talk about these, they go to these conferences and then they talk and then they share anecdotes.
Yeah.
And like, that's not science, man. That's not a thing. There's and we're going to be covering it on the No Rogan Experience, but there's this lady who did this thing called the telepathy tapes. And the telepathy tapes is where they used to do this stuff where they used to like hold people's arms that were nonverbal, very autistic people, right? And completely nonverbal, don't show any signs of being able to communicate. And they would hold their arms and do what they called facilitated communication, where they move their hands around. Right?
Human Ouija boards.
Basically, that's what it is. Yeah. It's a human Ouija board. And people, they could write, you know, in a language they've never actually learned because nobody ever sat down to teach it to them. But the facilitator can do these things. And so, but they've jumped from just them being able to communicate to them being telepathic now. So people think they're telepathic. And all of the I mean, pretty much every bit of the evidence that they have is all anecdotes. It's all anecdotal. It's all, and this person doesn't understand that did this telepathy tapes and that is, doing all this stuff. They don't understand that that's not good evidence, that
Right.
doesn't mean anything. That just because I did this thing with you, like let's say I gave you a certain amount of mushrooms or I gave you some ayahuasca and you personally were able to conquer your PTSD through this trip, that doesn't mean that's for everybody. And that doesn't mean that that's going to work again. It might not ever work again for anybody. You don't know. Now, granted, you could stack some of these anecdotes and start to try to get some data after a long period of time, but you've got to be real careful about how you're getting that data, right? These aren't people who are giving, I'm not going up to you, Tom, and saying, okay, I'm going to give you some ayahuasca, and then I'm not going to, over to, Eli and being like, I'm going to give you some ayahuasca and we're going to put you in a room and we're going to have you guys try to figure your demons out for a while. But I really just gave you sugar pills. Right. Nobody's doing that. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they might be because they probably don't have a good test kit or whatever, but nobody's doing it on purpose. Right. I don't think nobody's taking these people's money, because what this is sort of an underground network of people who are doing these psychedelics, hoping that they can try to cure their trauma. And I am sympathetic, deeply sympathetic to people who are hitting their face against the wall of our medical system and can't find answers to help fix them. I'm deeply sympathetic to those people. Man. Those people are going through a rough time. And the fact that we don't have answers for them is every day eating at them. They need to figure out what's wrong with themselves. And this might be the one moment where they can throw spaghetti against the wall and hope that something sticks. Hope that something sticks here. But these should not be considered something that is repeatable. We shouldn't be thinking about this as science. This is like your mom giving you honey tea because she thinks it might cure your cough. Right. This is all just, it's like folktale stuff. That there's nothing here that says that any of this stuff is actually working the way we think it's working. And by the way that they're doing it and the way they're the way that they're proceeding with these procedures, it may never, ever be something that we can use as an actual, a way in which to treat these types of illnesses. I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about too is like, both you and I are both legalization guys. Yeah. Yeah. Like we both think that it should be legal. Absolutely. And it's not like we are users. No, but I'm certainly a decriminalized guy. Yeah. But I want to circle back to something you said, because I think it's a really important point too, that makes the kind of real science around these drugs particularly difficult to do. And I want to be super clear too. I think we should do the science, right? Because I do too. I know you do. But let me tell you why this is particularly difficult. I can't give you MDMA and give me a sugar pill, and I don't know I got the sugar pill. I know I'm not having a hallucinogenic experience. There are some times the double-blind process is very, very difficult or impossible to perform, because you can't give me a sugar pill and be like, well, let's see, there's a psychedelic, there's an experience that I am not having. So sometimes the problem with double blinding or blinding at all is that the medicine has an effect. It has a feeling that you have. So if you give me something that doesn't produce that feeling, I don't know. I know immediately that I've been placeboed. I know it right away. You put me in that room, I'm like, oh, fucking, I feel nothing. Put you in that room and you're fucking tripping balls, It's different. And that makes it harder to study too. But I do want to say, if these things work, we do need to find out. Sure. We need to find out if they work. We need to find out if they're effective. Yeah. We got to do it the right way. You can't just skip the hard work part of science because it's hard and just move on to the throw it against the wall with human beings as guinea pigs. That's the problem is human beings are part of this. And there is a non-zero number of people for whom drugs like this, and we have a long history of this, for whom drugs like this trigger
psychotic events or uncover other pathologies like schizophrenia and like psychosis, bipolar disorder, and other problems. So we have to be careful when we're dealing with at-risk communities, vulnerable communities, that we don't throw drugs into their systems that might upset the balance of their mental health even further.
I think one of the things too is that these are normally given by people that are just avid amateurs.
Yes.
Right? So the person who's giving it to you probably isn't a doctor. They're just somebody who is involved in this in some way, whether they're, one of these people who this changed their life, so they're helping others now do this stuff. Or maybe they're one of these people who has one of these clinics that's not, a clinic. Again, I'm saying clinic and it's not a real clinic.
Right.
It's just like a place that you go that's not in the United States that happens to have this stuff that you do. But like one of the things that they were saying is, and this is something I looked up because I kept on hearing Joe talk about this ibogaine and ayahuasca and stuff. Some of this stuff can really fuck with your heart.
Right.
Like it can really fuck you up physically. Like, so it's going to do these things for you, maybe mentally, maybe it's going to help treat your PTSD or whatever, but like, it can really fuck you up and it can fuck up your heart, like irreparably fuck your heart up. So these drugs, if they're not administered by somebody who's like watching you and knows that these things can happen, like a psychiatrist, they're an MD, right?
Right.
So if they do go past all these human trials and they start getting prescribed, et cetera, a great person in the room to have next to you would be a psychiatrist, right?
Yeah.
That would be the perfect experience, so that you can have somebody who knows they're not only an MD, but they're also somebody who's, knows about the brain, knows about mental illness, knows how to work with you to try to get through this, psychedelic trip to try to fix you in the ways that you can be fixed, hopefully mentally, right?
Right.
Having somebody who's just like, yeah, man, I like doing this stuff, or I like helping people, and not knowing all the problems that can come up is probably not the best bet, but that's sort of where you're at with this. So we're in this weird spot because it's not a legal thing.
Yeah.
And so, I'd love to see it be something that you do try. But I think one of the problems is that so many people are so invested in this being right.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
That you're never, ever, ever going to hear the end of it if it doesn't pan out.
Yeah.
It's like ivermectin, right?
Right.
Like when ivermectin didn't work, people don't care. They literally think it cures cancer now. Like
they just moved on.
They've moved on from COVID to be like, it'll cure anything. It's literally a cure.
We've seen that with medical marijuana.
Yeah.
Like how much, like medical marijuana may have, and it's worth studying. Again, it's worth finding out. It may have some real benefits to people. But before we found those benefits, people were already claiming the benefits for like everything.
Yeah.
It was a fucking panacea.
Yeah.
We cannot be lured into the trap of believing that there is a panacea. There is not a panacea. That's just not a realistic thing that we should be looking for. I derailed us. You brought up the decriminalizing.
Oh, yeah,
thing,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I derailed us. I want to come back to that. I am 1,000% pro decriminalization, but I'm not pro decriminalization because I think that this is harmless. I just think that the harms of criminalizing
are worse,
exceed this harm. And I also want to point this out because I think this is worth putting my cards on the table as a human being. And I don't know that you feel this way, but I will tell you, Cecil, I would 100% try these things if I was in a state of extremis and didn't know where to turn. I would 100% try this. And I know that about myself because through the years, I have found myself with family members, people that I love very, very much, that have run up against the wall. And you find yourself at 2 a.m. and it's fucking the 10th night in a row and you're desperate and you know you need help. And there's nobody in the system that has an answer and can help you. And I know exactly what that feels like. And I know what I would do, which is to say, I'll try something else.
Do something else, yeah.
And maybe it doesn't work. And maybe it's fucking dangerous. but like at some point you need to exercise some control of the situation through action. So I want to make sure that like I don't come off as a judgy dick because I know myself and I know exactly what I would do.
And I sympathize with everybody who does this. Like I 100% don't think that the people who try this are dupes.
No.
I think these people are up against a thing that they're like, I care for those people. I want them to get the care that they need. And I want this to work for them.
Same, bro. Yeah.
I want it to be a thing that works for them. I just don't think the way that they're doing this, at least in this article, the way they're describing it. Now, granted, this article's old.
Yeah.
So it's possible that they've changed some of this stuff. It's possible that more of these things have become, because even in this article, there are moments that they're quoting papers, right? They're saying, here's a journal study about this. Here's a journal study about this. I'm sure they didn't just stop doing journal studies on it.
Yeah.
There's been more since then. I'm sure maybe there's been a push in some ways for people to regulate this a little better, regulate the experience a little better, take better notes on what happens to people, those types of things. The way they're describing it in here is it's like a hippie commune.
Yeah, man.
That you go to and everybody just gets drinks a bunch of stuff, pukes in a bucket, and has a fucking crazy, weird, psychedelic trip. And sometimes those people fix themselves.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I'm listening to Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan has some of these people on that talk about this. And I'm hearing anecdotes from some of these people that come on his show, and it doesn't sound like it's automatically working. It sounds like from what they describe, it sounds like a shitty time, and sometimes it works, and sometimes they have to go for multiple treatments, and so multiple treatments to me says doesn't work first time every time, right? It's got to do more than that.
No panacea.
And so it's not like something that you can just snap your fingers, but I'm right there with you. I 100% am sympathetic to all these people. I think, there is big gaps in our knowledge about understanding mental health and trying to learn, obviously we're learning more about it every year, but there's still big gaps and people fall through those gaps and they feel trapped and they need to they want to try to fix something. So I 100% with you.
And, like and from this article, one of the things too that I recognize is that, many of these drugs seem to have a mechanism of action where they put people into this incredibly open and vulnerable space. And that could be potentially, from what it's been described, it could be a really positive thing if they're surrounded by the right people, right? So if they're surrounded by people who can really help to empathetically and in a way that is competent, guide them through whatever it is that they're trying to work through, I can see a mechanism where that might have some real therapeutic value and shorten the distance from A to Z, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense. MDMA, I know, has a history in the psychiatric or psychological community for being something that was taken for couples counseling and other therapies so that people can talk about traumatic or difficult or painful or embarrassing or hurtful things without feeling the feeling. So they can express their thoughts, express their history, but not relive a trauma. I understand that there can be a mechanism, but that vulnerability and that openness can also create a space that can damage and shatter you if you're not with somebody competent, if you're with somebody exploitive, if you're with somebody coercive, if you're with somebody who's got an ulterior motive, or even if just you're with somebody who's not good at this. That's a problem, right? That level of vulnerability in an already vulnerable person, creating deeper vulnerability, the amount of regulation of some kind, training, research that would have to be done to make this reliably safe and reliably effective. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying I'm worried about it. I'm worried about it. I'm worried about it not being done well. The woman or the gentleman that wrote this article describes taking a whole bunch of something. I don't remember which drug he's taking, one of these psychedelics, and feeling, the word he used is feeling shattered from the experience.
Yeah.
And then, feeling oh my God, I've got to get divorced. And then wrestling with, is that a real feeling? Or is that something that they're feeling because they took all these drugs and they're so blown open and they don't know what's real and what's not real?
Yeah.
These are dangerous vulnerabilities. I'm not saying that they don't have some therapeutic value. They may have tremendous therapeutic value, but they seem also uniquely rife for exploitation, uniquely rife for the dangers of incompetence.
Yeah.
In ways that like just make me fucking nervous.
Yeah.
And I think that like, while that's not bad, one of the things that we're doing, unfortunately, is we're talking about them as if they're not dangerous. We're talking about them as if they are miracles. I don't know if you've seen around you, but around me, there's popped up all these ketamine clinics. Have you noticed these things?
I haven't seen them, no.
Ketamine is now prescribable for depression, for treatment for some resistant forms of depression. Ketamine, you can get it as a nasal spray from your pharmacy now, and you can also go to like an infusion center that specializes in ketamine. And it seems to have some real value for some subset of people, right? So it's been tested, it's been approved. But I'm also seeing this enormous profit motive. So these ketamine clinics are popping up, and you can go online and fill out a form and be like, now I totes qualify for some ketamine, because there's an enormous profit motive now that gets injected into this space. So I worry too with the psychedelics that you've got a vulnerable group of people, that these drugs make us possibly uniquely even more vulnerable and even more suggestible and even more, on this sort of like emotional knife's edge, because that's how these drugs would be useful, right? Yeah. Like just taking them recreationally may not put you there, but taking them in these doses they're talking about in these therapeutic environments. And then you're instituting this like profit motive. That all worries the shit out of me, bro.
Feels like there's got to be somebody who really understands everything that's happening all the time around you to make sure that, and it's not just, a guy who did it one time.
Yeah, man.
That seems like something that you'd probably want. I think too, they talk in here a little bit about the black market and, like the difficulty of getting these drugs. And I think like, maybe the benefit is that if we do the research on these and people realize that they're not as dangerous as they were, maybe they can be decriminalized, but they don't ever really become medicine.
That's exactly where my head's at. Yeah. I was thinking about this quite a bit on my drive here, because I was thinking like, I'm of such two minds about this. Like I am 100% certain that if I felt like this was the only way that I could get help for myself or someone that I loved, I would 1,000,000% be knocking on these doors.
Sure.
I'd be fucking shooting ayahuasca into my fucking eyeballs. I could go to Peru, whatever the fuck I got to do. I'm not licking toads, right? I am not licking toads if I think it's going to solve a problem I need to solve.
That is one of the things that they do is they smoke they're smoking toads.
You're smoking toads, yeah. So like I am 1,000% sympathetic, but I'm also super, super leery of the way it's being done and the profit motive and the difficulty of standardization, the difficulty of blinding these things, the difficulty of knowing what you're taking, all of that stuff. And I think that like maybe this stuff needs to live in a decriminalized space that is more personally experiential and less medicalized. And maybe that's not safer. I don't know. But I'm not certain how to close that gap or if that gap is closable.
Yeah. I'm not sure either. I don't know if that gap is closable. I know that our current HHS guy, I know his brainworm is excited about psychedelics. So it may be that soon there is more of these things that are being, part of me doesn't think he's going to test it. Like he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who really pays much attention to that stuff.
I don't think he values it.
So probably there's a possibility it could be something that gets fast-tracked into something that becomes a treatment for some of these things because it's something he personally believes works.
Yeah.
And so we might see something more than that. I would be interested to see this as something to be seen because the way they describe it for these therapies, it's like you said, it's like that shortening of gaps in therapy you can get through years of therapy in just small sessions with these large doses of this because it lays it all bare. And then if you have somebody, hopefully, that can help guide you, and you personally can do this, like mentally put this stuff together, you might be able to fix some of these issues that would take years of therapy to try to fix. And that could be amazing for people. I mean, think about how when they talk about it, I do understand why they call it a miracle, right? Like, I do understand why that title exists. I understand it, but I am fucking super leery of it.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's so many different things, profit motive and just avid amateurism, that'll make it cause it to be, I think, always just a little bit too dangerous to actually work as real medicine.
One other thing that I think is worth noting too is that in the current, like as it stands now, my understanding of most of the research that I've looked at is that the best results. So let's say you are trying to be treated for anxiety or depression or something along those lines. The best results seem to be a combination of a pharmaceutical and therapy. So the pharmaceuticals without therapy are not as effective as, like, if you just take the pharmaceuticals without therapy, they're not as effective. Pharmaceuticals plus therapy are much, much more effective, right? So one helps to bolster the effectiveness of the other. But we have a system where when you go to the doctor, they see you for 7 minutes, they write you a prescription, and mental health may or may not be covered under your fucking insurance plan. These drugs, and so a lot of people, they get a medicine, they go to the pharmacy, they take a pill, they don't have access to therapy, and they are not getting the full therapeutic benefit that many of these drugs have been studied to be the most effective combination, right? This feels so much the same, right? Where, like, if I just go take a bunch of MDMA because this got approved as a drug, and we're going to treat it the way we treat drugs, which is it's independent of therapy.
Yeah, you get it, and then you leave the office.
Right. Like, I wrote you a script for ecstasy, go to CVS, and I went to CVS and I got my fucking MDMA, and I went home and I took my fucking MDMA, and then I had whatever experience I have, and maybe it's good and maybe it's tragic. Could be one, maybe it's in between and it's fucking ineffective. Because what they're really describing in the article, when people are having positive experiences, is they're having some kind of a therapeutic guide person.
Somebody's there.
That's with them for, like you were saying, 14 hours, 24 hours, 72 hours. What the fuck would that cost?
Yeah. There's not a lot of psychiatrists that'll sit with you for 72 straight hours.
Even in the article, the person who wrote the article is like, yeah, at one point, I'm still like all fucked up and I'm still like tripping balls on this like heroic dose of MDMA. And the person I hired to sit with me is like, you gotta go.
Yeah, I got another customer.
And they like packed her ass into the car.
Yeah, they packed her up and they sent her on her way.
And like that person was like, yeah, I gotta go back to my husband. And like my husband had to take care of me. And I'm like in the middle of tripping balls for another like half a day.
Yeah, and they called them that night and said, I feel really weird. And they're like, yeah, it normally doesn't last that long. Anyway, I gotta go.
Right. Well, we're not going to ask fucking like United Healthcare to pay for a 72-hour trip concierge.
It's not going to happen.
That's not a thing either.
It's not going to happen.
So like, what are we going to do? Like, we're going to medicalize these things that really don't function in a medicalized system. And then you're going to give somebody a pill and they're going to take it apropos of nothing with no therapeutic, like adjunctive therapy.
It would have to be a clinic of some kind.
Right. And that's
right. It's like a clinic, like if you go to like detox yourself from alcohol.
Right.
You go to a place
inpatient
that's like an inpatient place that you go and you do these things.
Right.
They have these for all different types of things. So you could go inpatient and do something like this, but you're talking about an inpatient procedure. I guarantee you're fucking this is going to be relegated to rich people can do this. This is who's going to be able to do it is rich people because you're never going to be able to be like a regular Joe and just have your old Blue Cross Blue Shield. They're going to be like, fuck you. I'm not putting you inpatient for 3 days. Get on Ativan or whatever.
Yep, exactly.
And that's what they're going to do. And that's the extent of what they're going to do because of our medical system here. So it feels like it's doomed before it starts.
Same,
even.
man. Yeah.
So it's a weird place to be. And I'm also like you two minds. So I know that, like, I know how I feel personally, and I know how I feel when I think about it as a policy.
Same.
Yeah.
Because like, I think that there is a strong possibility that some of these things under the right conditions for the right people could have enormous transformative value. But I don't know how to scale that, regulate it, and control it.
RFK does.
RFK, there you go. Now I feel stupid, Cecil.
His brainworm went to Harvard. So.
Well, someone had to.
All right, well, we hope you enjoyed our conversation about this, and we'll be back on Monday with a brand new show. But we're going to leave you like we always do with the Skeptic's Creed.
Credulity is not a virtue. It's fortune cookie cutter, mommy issue, hypno-Babylon bullshit. Couched in scientician, double bubble, toil and trouble, pseudo quasi alternative, acupunctuating, pressurized, stereogram, pyramidal, free energy healing, watered downward spiral, brain deadpan, sales pitch, late night info docutainment. Leo, Pisces, cancer cures, detox, reflex, foot massage, death and towers, tarot cards, psychic healing, crystal balls, Bigfoot, Yeti, aliens, churches, mosques and synagogues, temples, dragons, giant worms, Atlantis, dolphins, truthers, birthers, witches, wizards.
It's time for you to reach under the bull and just grab him by the
nuts. Shaman healers, evangelists, conspiracy, doublespeak, stigmata, nonsense. Expose your sides. Thrust your hands, bloody, evidential, conclusive. Doubt even this.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/dissonancepod. Help us spread the word by sharing our content. Find us on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Threads, all under the handle @DissonancePod. This show is CAN credentialed, which means you can report instances of harassment, abuse, or other harm on their hotline at 617-249-4255 or on their website at creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org.